Yeah, so now again, it's not so right. Yeah, good morning. I'm glad to join from Mannheim, where construction work is going on. So yeah, good morning, everybody. Today I'm speaking about population projections, and in particular about regional projections at the subnational scale, a bread and butter job for many demographers and population geographers like me. At the Federal Institute for Population Research in Germany, I was involved over the past 15 years in explaining regional trends and patterns of shrinking and aging to local policymakers, administrators, and planners. My presentation draws on observations I made in this capacity over time, and I will conclude with some recommendations for policy advice. Please let me start with some preliminary remarks on the global prospects of shrinking, the uncertainty of projections in general, and the drivers of spatial population dynamics at the subnational level. I will further elaborate on why, in my humble opinion, population projections under conditions of shrinking face different challenges than under conditions of growth, in particular in their role for spatial planning and policy making. I will address two aspects using examples from Germany and the Netherlands. First, the role of volatility of underlying trends and for setting the assumptions, and second, the role of uncertainty. The first map shows when in the course of the demographic transition, the natural balance of births over deaths turns negative. I used the estimates and medium projection of the UN World Population Prospects for this map. We usually talk about population decline. However, the negative natural balance of births over deaths is often more meaningful. In this case, it draws attention to the role of migration for the population balance. As you can see, some countries turned into negative natural growth even before 1990s, followed by many others between 1990 and 2020 in light green and dark green. However, many of these countries do not show population decline at all right now. In Germany, for example, the population continued to grow since 1972. That was the year since which we had more deaths than births. And this is, of course, due to immigration. Shrinking populations are observed in many regions. Here again, an example from the UN World Population Prospects with the medium and the low and upper limit of the probabilistic projections. In some regions in Asia, population is expected to start declining sometime during the next decades. However, given the large span of uncertainty, when this will actually happen and how it will develop over time is an open question for planners and policymakers. The projections, even if they communicate the uncertainty, as in this example, sometimes raise more questions than they give advice. I would like to draw attention in this context to some recommendations from the UNECE. They established some recommendations in 2018, developed an explicit strategy for characterizing and communicating the uncertainty of population projections, identify and acknowledge the major sources of uncertainty, clearly state the uncertainty nature of the projection results in high-level dissemination materials, dedicate space within dissemination materials to promote a better understanding of uncertainty and its interpretations, pay close attention to verbal expressions of uncertainty, solicit and publish expert opinions, provide uncertainty analysis, provide sensitivity analysis, and provide a range of plausible assumptions. I mean, this approach is rather top-down and does not address all issues related to uncertainty, and I will come back to this in my conclusions. I'm now turning to a map of Europe at the NUTS 3 level. The map shows the natural balance versus the migration balance. In 2010, 43 of the NUTS regions in Europe experienced a population decline. They are depicted in this dotted pattern. In about 55% of the NUTS3 regions, the migration balance was negative, and in 65% of the regions, the natural balance was negative. This exemplifies the important role of migration for the regional population dynamics. The lower the natural balance, the more important the migration balance becomes for the population dynamics. And migration trends are more volatile and harder to predict. In my view, 5 consequences of volatility and uncertainty should be considered. So shrinking population is part of and can reinforce a vicious cycle of economic downturn and loss of employment, selective outmigration and aging, as well as disinvestment in housing and infrastructure and so forth. Depopulation often starts and is concentrated in peripheral rural areas or urban areas in economic crisis, where living conditions and quality of life are under threat, increasing the socioeconomic inequality and spatial disparities. The role of selective internal and international migration of young and qualified migrants for population projections increases, making assumptions more susceptible to the volatility of underlying trends. The impact of uncertainty of population projection outcomes for spatial planning and policy making increases when large prediction intervals transforms into either growing, stable, or shrinking populations, all with different challenges for planning and policy making. Predicting population decline has impact on investment in future development of regions and migration decisions of households, and can impede private and public investments, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy via a vicious cycle of decline. My first example shows the results of 3 consecutive revisions of the projections for Germany made by the Federal Agency for Spatial Planning, BBSR, and one on the right is from Eurostat, the most recent projection from Eurostat. I selected this map because it shows a reversal in spatial trends. In the first 2 maps on the left, the large cities in Western Germany are depicted as small dots in red, displaying a negative population growth projected for 2030. In the 2 maps on the right, the most recent, cities are no longer different than their surrounding suburban and rural areas. I don't have the time to go into more detail on these maps, but the shift in projected growth for the large cities in the 2 most recent projections by BBSR and Eurostat entails a significant change for planners. It indicates that the observed trends of re-urbanization is expected to continue, contrary to earlier assumptions underlying the 2 projections depicted on the left. Whether cities will lose population or gain is highly correlated to their internal migration balance, and the balance is volatile, as I said. The 2 graphs show how the younger cohorts driving urbanization, the lines in orange and red, fluctuated over time since 1995. Migration contributes to the changing disparities between East and West Germany, shown on the left, and the gains of urban and suburban counties versus losses of rural counties, shown on the right. In 2015, we also see the result of the refugee crisis. To get assumption right for internal migration is not an easy endeavor if there is such a lot of variation over time. I'm coming now to an example from the Dutch 2016 projections from PBL and CBS. The comparison between 2015 and 2035 shows that the number of municipalities with a positive natural balance is decreasing, and the number of regions with a negative internal migration balance is increasing. This map also indicates municipalities officially designated by policy as shrinking municipalities, the white dots. Others are officially designated as municipalities for which shrinking is anticipated, the white triangles. And this designation has, of course, an impact on the municipalities. On the one hand, their designation is a stigma of decline. And on the other hand, they, of course, receive some support to adjust to a declining population. And if you watch that closer, you see that the official designation hardly matches the results of the projections.
Frank, can I use the opportunity to give you the 10-minute shout?
Yes, thanks. The next map on the left shows the projected population decline up to 2040 for the corrupt planning regions in the Netherlands. Almost all peripheral regions are expected to decline, while the core is expected to continue to grow. The disparities are thus increasing. On the right, I compared the results of the 2013 with the 2016 revision of the PBL and CBS projections for 2040. In some cases, the projection results after only 3 years differ by up to -7.5% of the projected population. It is easy to understand that planners and policymakers in the affected regions are not happy about that. How can they develop plans to adjust to predicted population decline if uncertainty in projection is so high? The next slide, and then I will come to my conclusions, shows the uncertainty for the planning region of East Groningen and 3 municipalities for which population decline is in the cards, including the city of Groningen in green. The lower and the upper limit represents the 67% prediction interval. The span between both the upper and the lower limit is large. In some cases, the message for planners and policymakers is unclear. Population could either decline, stay almost stable, or even increase. In blue, I calculated the extent of the span in relation to population size. An uncertainty of up to 30% of the size of the municipalities, in the case of the smaller municipalities, questions how such projections results can inform local decision makers. I mean, this should be rather clear. So I'm coming now to my conclusions. So first, projecting shrinking population entails new challenges and consequences for spatial planning and policy making. Second, the predicting population decline can instill negative perceptions of a region's future, leading to negative impact on private and public decisions. Third, population projections are part of a complex planning and policy discourse. Results can be misused to manipulate planning and policy decisions. And I come to some recommendation amending those of the UNECE on the communication of uncertainty. This is first, avoid expert-led top-down discourses, involve stakeholders and civil society in preparation and communication of projections. Communicate the projection results as contingent to assumptions and address the volatility and uncertainty. Prediction is not the destiny for the affected municipalities and regions. Develop and communicate alternative scenarios and projections, projection variants relevant to stakeholders and policymakers and not only to demographers. Anticipate negative impact on planning and policy decisions. This is a big one and a message that I learned by giving advice to local politicians and planners and people working with regional population prospects. Thanks a lot for your attention.